Hey everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. It is Wednesday afternoon. We've got Zach on. We'll introduce him and let him introduce you. We were just reminiscing about old shows and other things as we are getting ready to go live. So, super excited to go have this conversation. In part, we're going to go talk about Prove It, which Vlad and I will be at in 2 weeks. 2 weeks from now, we will probably be doing a live show from the conference room floor in Dallas, which is super exciting. So we want to go talk to Zach a little bit about his background, the starting of 4.0 Solutions, the concept of UNS, and the concept of Prove It, of which we're all super excited. I have no idea how we will go fit everything into our normal 75-ish minutes, because all three of us could probably sit here and talk about it for 5 hours. So having said that, if you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you guys are new here or you aren't super active in the chat, we love to have a fun time. If you guys have questions or comments, either for myself or Vlad or Zach, please feel free to go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'll go ahead and bring them in whenever possible. If they're super technical or if you guys want to chat in and amongst yourselves, please go ahead and drop them in there as well. If you guys have questions that we can't get to, we will do our very best to get back to it after the show. But without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub. I am Dave. This guy up here is Vlad. This is episode 195. We're going to talk all about Prove It, and we want to welcome Zach to the show. Zach, welcome to the show, finally, officially. Thanks for being here.
Vlad, Dave, thank you guys for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us today, Zach. Before we get into the conversation of the UNS and Prove It, could you give us a little bit of a background? I know that Dave and I have been following your journey and adventures for quite a bit of time, but those who might not know what it is that you do and how you got started in industrial automation manufacturing, could you give us a little bit of your background, please?
Yeah, of course. So I have a background in SCADA integration. My parents actually had a company doing SCADA and control systems for water industry in Southern California, water, wastewater, treatment, distribution. And so I got exposed to that at an early age. So I've been doing this for a long time. My dad worked for Wonderware, and so I kind of grew up in the industry. So, that's kind of how I got started and exposed to this field. And then I also had like a passion for video content creation. So, after I became a senior engineer, I was kind of looking for, new ways to challenge myself. And I was like looking at video content and how I could incorporate that to shed more light on what it is that we do as, system integrators, as SCADA developers. And so that's where, I partnered up, I started my own media company, and I actually partnered up with Walker Reynolds, who was an owner of a system integrator, who, when we started doing video content together, that grew into IoT University, which is where I work today with 4.0 Solutions, where we help train engineers and executives how to lead successful digital transformation journeys, which is kind of, what we've done over the last 10 years. Like when I met Walker 10 years ago on one of the world's largest oil and gas SCADA projects, that was an Ignition Firebrand award-winning project. And, that's where our careers first crossed paths. And, here we are today where we're launching the Prove It conference in 13 days. So, I was saying before the podcast, I'm like, dude, I'm kind of nervous because this has never happened before. It's been like 5 years that we've been putting out content, through, at first Intellic integration and then through 4.0 Solutions. And, I've been building my own personal brand in the industry, doing events and sponsored content and things of that nature, as well as, to see the industry mature from like where there was just a few people doing it to now where we're at today. It's like really awesome to see. So, that's a quick introduction to me. And,
let me ask you, Zach, I guess I have a couple of follow-up questions on that side, right? But I'm curious because obviously I think a lot of individuals are trying to learn the content, or I would say the marketing component. But ultimately, I think there's different paths, right? And you can go back to school and get a degree, but I'm understanding that you've not done that, right? You've learned on your own. So I'm curious, maybe how did you learn how to create content? And maybe if someone's looking, someone who's a little bit more technical, whether that's on the SCADA side or, control side, how would you maybe advise them to learn how to get better at that today?
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I don't have a degree. I was going to college at Cal Poly Pomona in aerospace, and I dropped out to basically work for my parents' company full time, doing a SCADA integration for a water district that was like a soup to nuts, from the PLC programming and automation through the radio communications to building out the server infrastructure, all the way down to building out the applications for supervisory control and data acquisition. In that case, it was a Wonderware application. But yeah, it was like I gained so much more experience just on that one application than I did in college. And then from there, and I had already been doing it at that point, but that was kind of what made it go full time. Yeah, so like, and then the media stuff was just trial and error, right? Like I had an interest in it. I would say the number one thing that was made the content that, what separated the content between the clients that I worked with that were successful and weren't, and ultimately Walker was one of the clients that I worked with that was most successful, which was sharing it. Well, one, Walker is a great communicator, but two is like sharing actual experiences and coming from a place of knowledge that the content was actually valuable, to the point where the production value didn't really matter that much. People would still watch it even if the production quality was bad. Yes, good production quality helped, but you couldn't just take you couldn't just regurgitate something you read about. Like it came from real experience, and I think that's what made it successful.
Yeah, and I think that's really great, right? And to put this alongside of the same maybe train of thought for the conference is I think that the deep technical expertise is almost a requirement when it comes to a lot of these, not only projects, but a lot of this knowledge that is transferred, to other engineers who are looking to solve real problems. I think that you can say that in many pieces of content, not just, I want to say the main conferences, but in general, what you will find is not produced, but someone who has that expertise, who has that firsthand experience, and therefore it's a bit too high level for someone to actually take and absorb. And I certainly, appreciate a lot of the videos that you and Walker have created over the years. I know that there's, and as you said, I think people are not looking for high production value. People are really looking to understand a lot of the not only layers, but how does the data passed? Why is the data passed in a certain way? How do you store data, right? And that's where maybe the next topic of the conversation will go. But ultimately, that's how all of the knowledge was built in order to position the UNS not only from a marketing standpoint, but also from a very technical understanding of the field and what's happening in manufacturers, right?
Oh my God, there's so much to unpack there.
Yep. Yeah. Well, let's, what I mean,
Dave,
like,
where do you want me to take this? Because we could unpack what is the unified namespace. We could unpack.
Yeah, so I guess let me make one comment before we go into what is the unified namespace, because I think that's very core to the conversation and the conference. But Zach, I think you brought up a really good comment about the reason why people are listening to the messages from the very beginning was because of that experience, right? And that's one of the things that Vlad and I tell all of our potential guests is if you have experiences, if you can tell us about projects you've done, that really resonates. It resonates both with Vlad and I as well as all of the listeners. And so I thought that was really good. We certainly in this industry find people who have real things to say, having that longevity and success on the marketing and on the content side, as opposed to people who are very kind of middle of the road and don't have any experiences and are just throwing volume out into the wind. So if people are listening, absolutely going and sharing those experiences are super important. And I thought that was a really great topic that you brought up, Zach. And I wanted to make sure that we hit on that for the listeners.
It's like Vlad. Why do people listen to your PLC training videos? Because you're out here doing this stuff. You're out here doing the real work. You're getting burned and you're learning the hard way. And then you're summarizing all of that pain and learning progress into a training video that someone could consume online so that they could get started. It's not, let alone industry 4.0, like, and we could unpack that as well, right? Like what is that? You got the fourth industrial revolution, which is really the time period that we're in right now. And industry 4.0, which was European spec, which came out in 2011, which you could basically just throw out, right? But digital transformation is that process, and then digital transformation, which is that process of becoming a digital company, which is like, you know, what we specialize in. But people are still hungry for just learning at the edge, which is, you know, a whole field unto itself, right? And maybe there's even a larger market for that.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think there's a lot changing. There's a lot of information that is, I want to say, still not being decimated. I think there's a huge potential for people to come and create content in a lot of these topics, right? That we're going to see at the conference.
What is your most popular course and or like video? Like, what is it that?
Yeah. So that's a good question, right? I think the short answer is the entry level stuff, right? So the beginner, like PLC, how to get started with a PLC. And you know the reason why, right? Because the deeper you get into a subject, the more knowledge you need to have. And ultimately, there's less engineers who will consume that type of content, right? But I always, when I discuss this with marketers, which is a bit counterintuitive, is the deeper of a problem you solve for the end user, right, or for the person watching the content, the more likely they are to build the trust and ultimately use the product that you're showcasing. So I can, you know, every day of the week, I can show you how to connect to an Allen Bradley PLC, how to write a few rungs of logic, and that's going to get tons and tons of views. But if I can showcase something like, you know, connecting data into an MES from an Allen Bradley PLC, log it in a specific way, there's obviously less people just because the population and the demand is smaller. But that is a deep technical problem that needs to be solved by very specialized individuals who, if solved, would trust, I guess, the rest of the knowledge that you have. Does that make sense? So the short answer is like the entry level stuff is what has the most views, but I don't think that's what people should be focused on. That's at least my view.
100%, 100%.
Absolutely. Zach, let me ask you, can you, for the listeners who potentially don't know, tell everyone what UNS Unified Namespace is and the origins of it? Can you weave us a story, please?
Yeah. So Unified Namespace is it's the central source of truth for all data and information within your business. And some people, they have a problem with that statement because, you know, it's technically not this. It's not where you're storing the data for, like, let's say historical data. Well, you know, historical data is not stored in the unified namespace. So how is it the single source of truth for all data information in your business? Well, all events pass through the unified namespace. So a historian could subscribe to your unified namespace and collect those events and store them in real time. So it's the place where the historian gets its data from. So in that regard, it's, you know, it's that central nervous. Someone said they liked this description. It's like a central nervous system of your business. It's feeding all of that data and, you know, the brain, right? You have your cloud and your AI. Like, it kind of makes sense, but you know, it's the data infrastructure layer, semantically organized, ISA 95 format, which is what we recommend, enterprise, site, area, line, cell, so you can have a navigable folder hierarchy, you know. And, you know, some people just think of it as like a naming system. It goes much further than just a naming system in ISA 95. It's that whole concept of it's a broker that's publish and subscribe, edge driven. So you have your edge of network nodes connecting and publishing and subscribing to information through your broker where all of those events are passing through. So that's unified namespace, right? I know that was probably like a really long-winded answer. Where did it come from? Where is the origin? There's really two concepts here. I would say unified namespace, like the concept, you know, what Walker would say is he created it in a salt mine and back in the early 2000s with Microsoft Excel and DDD data exchange through RS links to PLCs in a salt mine, where he was creating that same format. That was the genesis of it. When was the first time unified namespace, the actual term, was like publicized and coined? That was in 2018 when we started publishing videos. And so I would say prior to when the name was actually coined and when it was popularized as that, That's Unified Namespace, the name that came in 2018, and Unified Namespace, the concept, came in 2000 from Walker, right? But together we helped popularize that movement. But with the help of the community, people started blogging about it, right? At first, it was almost like they were just trying to do SEO, like to try to, get higher rankings for marketing terms. But then it grew to something people like, once they dug a little bit deeper, then they were like, oh, this is actually really powerful and transformative. Like, yes, it's a simple concept in theory, but when applied, this is truly what can enable a transformation of an organization. And then that's, I think this is 2022, 2023 is really when it just fucking blew up, And then, last year was 2024, and now we're in 2025, and we're putting together the Prove It conference, right? Which we could even dive into what that is, like if
Exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna, maybe take a step back a little bit, right? Because I ultimately don't want to assume that every listener of ours understands, or I would assume they have heard maybe of the UNS, but I think once you've given a definition, it makes a lot of sense. What I do want to ask you, right, if someone's maybe in a decision maker position, why should they, what is maybe the business case, right? Not the technical architecture and how the data is driven, but what can they articulate that would provide a positive to the business when it comes to the UNS? Does that make sense?
With the right mindset, right? Digital transformation is a strategy, and if you have the right strategy, you have a reason of why you want to become a digital company. That's like your North Star. Like for SpaceX, that's, we want to make life multiplanetary. How? Through creating a reusable rocket, by lowering the cost of a payload to orbit, by creating a reusable rocket that they're also, optimizing the manufacturing that goes into that reusable rocket, and trying to optimize their cycle times and their OEE and all, and and ramp their production of like Raptor version 3 engines. And so like you have, why do I want to become a digital company? That's your North Star. Once you have that, Unified Namespace is the infrastructure upon which you will solve all of your business problems iteratively. So once you integrate data into that infrastructure, you can use it to solve a problem, but then you could just use it to solve every other problem from here on out, rather than creating new data silos or point-to-point integrations, like, very discrete and standalone. You're creating a more integrated, cohesive system that actually helps your business become smarter. Like, what does that mean? It means your people, your employees' digital fluency level increases by consuming that information in real time from the Unified Namespace, to be able to build applications, to be able to build automations, to solve problems, to build reports, to build data, to model data, right?
Yeah, I think it, like, as you said, I think it's simple in general, right? But you still go to factories, and again, like, it frustrates me when you find different silos created by different integrators with different solutions, and then you essentially ask the question, which is fairly fundamental, of how can we access that data, and can we access the current, I want to say, historians or data lakes, and the answer is often no. We're going to start from scratch, which is, I'm going to go all the way to the sensor level or the PLC level and start from the beginning to extract that data. So I think it makes complete sense. And I think now I would say, or I would argue, that it's easier than ever, or cheaper than ever, I think, to be able to get that data into a centralized location, versus in the past, you maybe had some constraints on the protocols and, the different brands that were not as open, I would say. So it was maybe a little bit tougher looking back at several decades ago. So I don't know if maybe
The
you have
crazy
some thoughts
part,
on.
Vlad? Yes.
Huh?
Okay. I love that you brought this up. But the crazy part is, people say, oh, like, I've been doing Industry 4.0 for like 40 years or whatever. As its current definition, technically, no, you have not. You've been doing, you in theory could accomplish what you could do in Industry 4.0, but you would need an army of engineers to maintain a massive code base of point-to-point integrations, like with serial networks, There's just no way, because you can't do edge driven with a serial network. You have to define it in the central server, which means you can't do pub sub. It's pull response by nature, serial networks, right? Once Ethernet came out and TCP IP won the protocol wars, you had Ethernet IP. We had MQTT back then. We could have been doing this since early 2000s. And maybe, and so if you were doing this in the early 2000s, then you could say, yes, I've been doing it for 20 years, 25 years, and you could actually be accurate under today's definition of how to, what is Industry 4.0 in the sense of, yes, it's a cyber intelligence systems, but what are the pillars of Industry 4.0? Edge driven, right? Report by exception, only publishing data when it changes on change. Lightweight protocols, so you're not blowing up you're not creating bottleneck in your bandwidth. And open architecture plays nice with anything. All the automation vendors of the early 90s and late in the 2000s, they just created hard ecosystems that you had to pay to get data out of. So that made digital transformation impossible, right? It would cost too much money and it would take too much time, right? So really, this has only been possible within the last 10 years or so, right? Like in mainstream.
Yep.
Technically possible for the last 25 years, but I think it's really become mainstream within the last 4 or 5 years, honestly.
Yeah, I guess I'm nodding at all of those comments because I've had many of these conversations, and I think that people are missing the point, which is not that, there was not some kind of a switch where all of a sudden this is now completely different than what we've been doing before. Like, yes, you were collecting data. Everyone has always had metrics, right? At the end of the day, everyone's has known to some extent how many pallets came out the door. It's not like, you cannot count the number of trucks or the number of cases being put out by the facility. But the fact that it is much cheaper, it's much more accessible, smaller facilities can do it. There's tons of, I want to say, new platforms that allow you to tie in, like whether that's store the data, pass the data, transform the data, or do whatever with data at almost a near zero cost, right? And software, of course, it's way different than what you saw 10 years ago. So to make the argument, well, we've always collected the data, sure you have, but it is way different. So you and I, at least, I don't know if Dave agrees, but I certainly agree on that side too.
In theory, right, Industry 3.0 automating a manufacturing process, Industry 4.0 automating the decision process, automating the business. In theory, you could have done it using Industry 3.0 methods, but in practice, you couldn't, because it would just become too complex, and
and there's a limit, right?
You couldn't scale. You would reach critical mass, you couldn't scale, and but I have a question for you, Vlad.
Tell me.
You're in the weeds, like you're programming, you're in the dirt. What programs are you using? What platforms? Like, what's your go-to platform for PLC, and what's your go-to like IoT platform right now? And any other shout outs or honorable mentions?
Dangerous question, Zach. Dangerous question. So my background, right, from early career.
You're on the clock, Vlad. We're going to set a timer for 90 seconds.
So I've been, I guess, brought up on the largest, you want to say, OEM in North America, which, as you can see by the wall I have behind me, is Rockwell, right? So I've done a ton of digital transformation on anything from PLCs to HMIs to their SCADAs and MES.
Right? So including our RSView and
yes, RSView, if you want to talk about like then managers, then clients, right, deploying on Factory Talk View SC. I've also got experience on Ignition, which I think has gained a ton of traction over the last, I want to say 5 years, right? So I've done a number of projects, whether that's conversions from other platforms to Ignition or conversions from other platforms to Rockwell. Ultimately, I've done data passing via OPC. That's going to be, through Kepware, MQTT, HiveMQ. So there's going to be a lot of, or a mix of different solutions. I've certainly tinkered in the lab environment on a lot more than that, but I would say that the customers I'm dealing with are primarily on Rockwell, some percentage of Siemens, and then it's going to be your Ignitions and your HiveMQ for the brokers.
Okay. Dude, that's crazy that you say Ignition's relatively newer, like in the last 5 years, because I've been doing ignition for 13 years, dude.
Well, it grew. I mean, you have the sense of like
Which
how
means
big
I was
it
an
is,
early
right?
adopter. I was an early adopter, but at that time I didn't
Yeah.
feel like an early adopter because you still had factory PMI all the way back as like 07, factory PMI, factory SQL, and then they came out with Ignition, which was revolutionary and groundbreaking. I found Ignition just trying to Google for like how to build a cloud SCADA. I think this was like early 2012. And then I started doing my first integrations and I started doing conversions from Wonderware to Ignition. And I'd done a couple and I went to training and, this was like 2013. And, that's ultimately when I crossed paths with Walker on that Ignition, one of the really world's largest, the oil and gas project was insane because they had like a bunch of different companies that they had purchased that all had their own standalone SCADA systems that we were trying to integrate them all together. So it was like doing 5 or 6 SCADA conversions at once. So we had to rethink how to even do it, and Ignition at the time, they didn't have the Cirrus Link module. They didn't have MQTT in Ignition at that time. So how did we build a unified namespace for that customer? We worked with Ignition and inductive automation to build out the gateway area network for the tag provider network. And that was edge-driven, lightweight, open architecture, lightweight. You was using HTTP WebSockets, right? So we had a distributed, we used a distributed architecture, right? So each of the assets that they had purchased, which was a standalone system, would communicate to like a distributed ring gateway. And then all of those would kind of report back up to a central enterprise gateway. And it was incredible. I learned so much just on that project alone, from, like my Python skills, SQL skills. Ignition I'd already been doing for a while. And then, I had been doing SCADA prior to that, Wonderware, playing around with it since, I was like in my teens, so.
Yeah, and I think, to that comment, really briefly, I think it's industry specific, right? But more importantly, company specific. And for me, to be, I guess, honest with you, it was part of my frustration early in my career, right? Because I'd be reading about all kinds of different platforms, whether that's on the SCADA or MES side, or even PLC or HMI wise. And I would, again, go to my employer at the time and say like, hey, like I'd like to try this platform that I think might be better than some of the tools we're currently using. And obviously, again, in a very large company, you rarely have that opportunity, right? So you need to almost learn on your own or outside of work in order to understand some of those nuances and benefits of the platforms. You cannot make the decision of, hey, we're going to use a different platform. That's decided, at the VP level of some of those companies. Which, again, for an engineer, it's how would I say it? It can sometimes be maybe misunderstood, but again, it's tough to make those calls at that point in time. Yeah. Dave, what are your thoughts? Platforms, I guess, things you're working on.
No, I think it's interesting. I would say that my experience with Ignition probably only goes back about 8 or 9 years at this point. So, for me, it wasn't as much of a surprise. I think that certainly within the last 5 or 6 years, the pricing, the openness, and the force of, I don't know, digitalization, if you will, has driven more people to find it. So I certainly think more people have found it. Zach, Vlad, and I were at the ICC in September. It was the last year they're in Folsom, and they had huge tents outside, right? And we were like 90 minutes to go get our ticket because we were like around 3 corners of the Harris Center, standing in line to go get tickets. So it's certainly grown. There's certainly a lot more people there. Kind of more and more involved in the ecosystem. And like I think on our show on Manufacturing Hub, I think we had like 4 or 5 continents worth of people that we had conversations with, right? So kind of just it has grown significantly outside of North America or the Americas, which is certainly more, or the Americas and Australia is what I remember it 7-ish years ago, for the majority of people. So that is certainly grown.
Inductive, they're going big this year with their conference. You were saying at the new venue. And and obviously they're also sponsoring. They're a sponsor at the Prove It conference. I was at the very first Ignition community conference. in like, it was like 2013. And there was like 150
It,
people, you know, and
I was gonna say it has grown significantly
that's
from that.
crazy.
I feel like they cracked 1,000 people
It's gonna be
this
huge.
year, which is a lot of people in one space, and so I'm certainly excited for next year. I would say technology wise, similar to Vlad, the majority of the controller hardware that I see is Rockwell, with a strong second being Siemens. But I think that's probably just the sort of clients that I find, or that find me. And then the majority of the work that I'm doing and have been doing for the last 6 or 7 years has been on the ignition side, which again is probably more the selection process for people to find me or the work that I'm going to do, as opposed necessarily saying what the market looks like. And then having the conversation of MQTT versus OPC-UA and what networking looks like, and kind of all of the other pieces in between. And do we have redundancy, or are we cloud first? That is very much end user driven. None of those are necessarily forks that are, none of those are necessarily areas that I'm going to die on when it comes to the consultant or it comes to the practitioner going and building and deploying. A lot of that is very much end user based. Personally, I'm really excited to see some of the newer iterations of technology, and I don't know how much we're going to see it prove it, right? So I know the Litmus folks will be there. I love the platform. I love what Vatsal and the team have built over the 3 or 4 years at this point that I've known them fairly well. So I love what they're doing. That is much more a scale conversation. Vlad and I have had this conversation for hours and hours, but like that is more of a scale conversation. So I like seeing what that is. I don't know what the Siemens team are going to bring, but they have kind of their industrial edge ecosystem, which is kind of edge-based applications that you can go buy on a SaaS basis. And for me, that is really interesting. I'm hoping that more people are interested in buying into what that market looks like, because I think it'll help experts go and build particular solutions that are really helpful for those solutions and allow them to focus on the things that they're good at and be able to go continue to make money off of that and hone that craft. And so that is one of the areas that I am particularly interested in, hoping that we see more of, and certainly spending more time researching and working with those teams as they're growing and building.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought up like some of the you said newer iterations of technology. I was thinking of it like these, I would call them like more so emerging providers, right? You had the foundational platforms, you had Ignition, you had frameworks with Tatsoft, and these are the IoT platforms that got us to where we are today, right? And then you had Kepware was a major data collection driver that helped us get to where we are today. We owe a huge thanks to Kepware. But what's going to get us from today to tomorrow, or what's bringing us into the future, right? You got platforms. That's why I'm just so excited that it's almost poetic that Inductive Automation and SiriusLink are co-sponsors, because they really were where you could build, in Arlen Nipper with SiriusLink Solutions, the co-inventor of MQTT, which is what we build the Unified Namespace on. To have them as a sponsor, it's like going full circle. And then now we get to see, this is where we're going to see that next, like you said, that next iteration of technology, these emerging providers, Litmus, HiveByte, HiveMQ, MaintainX, and also we have some legacy providers there that we get to see what does their new strategy look like going into the future, right? Siemens, Aviva, some of these, really big automation providers that we all know and love. What does their future strategy look like? So to have them there at Prove It as well, is just like, I can't even wait, honestly.
So I feel like we're slightly jumping the gun on Prove It. Before we get into kind of a little bit of the basics, we do have a ton of comments. So again, if you guys are in the chat, please feel free
we could
to
talk
say
tech.
hi.
If there's questions,
Justin
we can answer questions We could talk technology and digital transformation all day.
We've got a question for you, Zach. But first, I just want to let everyone know that Dustin is oogling the L61 that currently sits above Vlad's, what is that, your left shoulder over there. I have, for the last almost 200 episodes, tried to convince Vlad to do a walkthrough of all of the PLCs that are currently in his office, but he so far has yet to agree. Maybe that we can do something for special episode 200 coming up. What else? We've got Mark O'Donovan in the comments. He says he's going to be a Prove It. Super excited to meet Mark. Mark has been on the show. We've got Frank Lamb in the comments. Frank has been on the show. We've got Isaac from Nigeria in the comments. This is all awesome. So, Zach, Dustin has a question for you. If you were going to do another oil and gas deployment, what edge device software would you deploy? Super easy, right? Nice, easy.
Litmus.
I would use
Litmus Edge, and I would deploy on my hardware using Dell Native Edge. Because where do these technologies even come into play, right? When you come into massive scale, right? When you're deploying using containers, like if you're using Litmus Edge and not deploying using container, like I don't know what you're doing, but and then to be able to manage your hardware, like you have not only data ops at the edge, which is what Litmus Edge can do. You could do you could build your whole unified namespace in Litmus, right? So I would use for edge collection, data collection, Litmus. Now, if you're like, hey, if you're on a manufacturing line and you want to build like the most badass, or you're at a manufacturing cell and you want to build the most badass operator interface, Tulip, like it just depends on what you're trying to solve, right? And then if I'm trying to model data across the enterprise at scale, make it easy for my data consumers to build data pipelines, HighByte, right? Or if I'm going to use enterprise scale broker, HiveMQ, right? So the or EMQX, right? I'll mention them too, because even though they're not a sponsor at Prove It, I would still consider using them. Sedalo, right? Most people don't know about Sedalo. They are basically an enterprise version of Mosquito, the open source broker.
Yep. Yeah.
So, there's a lot of technologies. So, but to answer your simple question, yeah, I would use Litmus and probably at the edge. Like, I can't answer that question without going out and building out my whole dream architecture, But do you have any other questions or any other questions for the chat?
That was kind of the big one. I'm sure Dustin is going to have some follow-ups, and you and he may go have some words after this, depending upon where he falls on that. But no, I think it's interesting. And again, for me, part of the conferences and the exploring other technologies this is what we're doing today. What are we going to be doing in 5 years? Or the whole conversation about data ops or industrial data ops at scale. And that is a conversation that Vlad and I have been having over the last probably year or so. And I think to me that's interesting, right? It's not we're going to deploy one SCADA at one facility and then it's done. It's we're going to go do it 5 or 5 dozen times or 10 dozen times or maybe more, depending upon the oil and gas deployments, right? We're going to do it so many times. How do we go build a solution that is actually scalable, as opposed we're going to copy and paste, and from the copy and paste we're going to redo 50% of it in order to go hit the next site. So for me, that's interesting. I am confident Zach has thoughts on that, but that would take us like through the end of the show. So Zach, I want to go talk about Prove It, right? And the concept of Prove It ties in with the concept of UNS, and with that kind of going and breaking the mold of previous conferences. So can you give everyone a little bit of an overview of what Prove It is, what people are trying to prove, and how they go about proving that? Which to me, again, is one of the top reasons that Vlad and I are going, because I'm super excited to see what people come up with.
Yeah, I mean, so Prove It, right? What is Prove It? It's it's an Industry 4 community conference that's happening February 18th through 20th at the Westin Galleria in Dallas, Texas. In 13 days, we have over 500 tickets already sold. Like they're about to sell out, honestly. So if you haven't gotten your ticket, you should go get your ticket now at proveitconference.com, right? If you're a manufacturer, you qualify for a discount. You could I can't, there's going to be over 60% manufacturing / end users, people that have the problems that this technology is set to solve, right? So it's not just going to be a bunch of vendors getting together to meet. And it's not going to be, what's the problem with end users? Excuse me. What's the problem that end users had when they would go to conferences? The people at the conferences were in sales and marketing. So they weren't actually technical enough to be able to answer your questions. So they wouldn't even be able to get value from it, or they couldn't get as much value as they could from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
They would ask you, how does this technology in your booth play with the technology in the booth right next to you? And they wouldn't have an answer for you. Or they would say, maybe we have an API, or, well, I could put you in contact with someone. So Prove It is all about flipping that on its head and making the vendors actually prove it. And the vendors that are going to prove it, the ones that are going to shine, I mean, they have gone through extensive efforts to get to where they're at, right? When they go up on stage and they share their Prove It session, I mean, there's going to be points where they're going to get a standing ovation, right? The crowd's just going to lose their mind, right? There might even be software companies that are announcing new features that Prove It. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but like, there's going to be so much hype built up. There's a bunch of influencers that are going to be there. You guys are going to be there. We have a podcasting booth.
Amy's going to be there. I really like the content that she's putting out, right? So from Skellig.
Jeff Winter, the world's #1 Industry 4 influencer. Like, I mean, it's even bigger than I would have ever imagined, honestly. And it's really a community conference, right? It's not any one vendor's conference. It's not any one company's conference. It's the community's conference. And the vendors who prove it and who, they're going to earn the respect of the manufacturing end users. And that's going to generate business. It's going to get the ball rolling, right? Our whole goal is to actually help manufacturers digitally transform. And we can't do that without the help of our vendors. And they've been totally receptive, especially over the last few years, to what the community has been asking for when it comes to unified namespace and when it comes to open architecture, right? Mm-hmm. You want to talk about, if I had a Zach's quadrant, or, what is an underdog or an up and comer, you got to take a look at Maestro Hub, right? They're a single source of truth, like a data modeling platform. Well, like, we're throwing around this term platform. What does that even mean? Like, Vlad, to you, what is a platform?
I mean, to me, it's a collection of software that typically has, a component that lives in their cloud, and then a component that I can deploy to solve a specific problem. Like, that's what I would call a platform.
Okay. I would say that's close. How would you define I would call that more of a stack, where when you say a collection of software, I would call that like a stack or a solution. But a platform, to me, what is a proprietary solution, right? You think of like, when I think of a proprietary solution, I think of like, let's say Rockwell RSView, right? Just not open, it just works best with Allen Bradley PLCs, right? It's a closed architecture. It's the walled garden, right? That's closed architecture. Open architecture.
Well, to me, open architecture is like APIs are readily available. I think if I want to pull data out, then I can, right?
I think a platform is built on a technology. Okay. That's what a platform is, right? Rather than being built on a solution, the platform is built on a technology. So it's technology driven versus solution driven, right? I'm not building out Pi objects and now I'm locked into the Pi ecosystem. I'm building out relational data models that are in a unified namespace that hundreds of vendors can understand and consume from. That's what a platform enables, right? So you have many platforms that are going to be at Prove It. You have some edge devices, you have some system integrators, but you have a ton of platforms. Mm-hmm. So to me, and then, what is an IoT platform? It's a platform for solving problems that's built on an IoT ecosystem, on a data infrastructure like an MQTT broker with a unified namespace.
Yep. Let me ask you, I guess, more of a fundamental question, right? So I certainly understand. And to make the comment, maybe I think the current conferences, I think it's important to recognize the fact that you guys need to put in a lot of work to create the architecture into which these vendors can, and again, we're not going to maybe show the specific diagrams, but I'm assuming anyone has access to them and can see what the architecture of the facility looks like, and they're going to be presenting different solutions that tie into that architecture. But I think you guys, as the organizers, have put in a lot of legwork to make that possible, right? Whereas at the current conferences, I think it's just impossible for a vendor in their own closed off, I don't want to say bubble, but I guess that's the best word I can find right now, to create something that tangibly connects to a facility without creating that architecture on top of different solutions themselves, right? Which I think is the very big unique factor of what you guys are bringing,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
again is a lot
I'm
of
glad you
different.
mentioned that. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm glad you mentioned that because I don't think I brought it up enough or highlighted it enough. Is that like all of these 35 vendors will have a common virtual factory that they'll be able to consume data from, and basically their whole goal for their previous session was to pick a business problem that they can solve that would demonstrate one of their platforms, one of their features. And like I said, the range of what the solutions are, some are very creative, some are very basic. One vendor, oh my God, I can't mention the name, but I honestly, because I'll give them a chance because I think they could pull it together, and I think there was someone there who did, but it was clear on that one vendor, someone on the phone did not know what a unified namespace was, and I was like, oh God, if you do not get it together quickly, guys, you're going to be exposed on stage. So, but yeah, like that's what. But so it's going to give the audience this chance to be able to see all of these different problems solved with a unified context, this virtual factory. And we can speak to, with authority, saying that these vendors aren't just doing smoke and mirrors. Like they've actually went, we've intentionally put up hurdles to make it difficult for them to build out their solutions. So we know when we say, hey, like this vendor proved it, that it actually means something.
Yeah. I'm very curious, a quick like side question, right? How did you create this virtual factory, right? I know that there's some simulation tools that are possible, and ultimately in software you can create pretty much anything. But what did you guys do if someone wanted to create maybe a small replica, or if you guys were ever to make this available for someone to use, on a test bench or a test environment? What did you guys use to create the software for the factory?
I'm not the best person, honestly, the question is at which point, right? It's been through so many iterations and it's a continuing to develop. One of the things that changed in the last 2 weeks was like all of the vendors who were not working ahead, they were like, oh shit, the conference is in a month. Now we got to start working on our solution. So they all started working together at the same time and it brought the broker down. So we had to put up a load balancer. And, Walker, if you're at the conference, you could talk to him and ask him, and I'm sure he'll love to go into it in detail, but he's really the mastermind behind this year's virtual factory infrastructure. But what I'm excited for is what we do for next year, right? So 2026, we're going to be doing a life sciences virtual factory. This year was really just a beta conference. This is our first year we're doing a conference. We didn't even know if it was going to be successful. I mean, doing this conference, it could have bankrupted our company, right? It was a huge ass risk. So, and it's not done yet, right? We still got to deliver an amazing conference for the guests and the vendors, and in order to even get to 2026. But one of the sponsors, Skellig, they're a life sciences expert, and they've already volunteered to like actually be the integrators to help us deploy this virtual factory infrastructure. Because honestly, it ended up being a ton of work to actually do. And we have meetings with HiveMQ weekly to be able to like talk about the fact, they're the ones that are doing the MQTT broker. And, we have Dell with the infrastructure that we're meeting with. They're the title sponsor. We had Google Cloud come in as a title sponsor, like within the last month. And that was freaking huge. So at the conference itself, there's going to be 2 stages. One's going to be Dell, one's going to be Google stage. So like it's to have those as title sponsors as your first conference, it's kind of like, it's very humbling. It's honestly insane. And we couldn't have done it without them. right? And then all the gold sponsors and the silver sponsors and the bronze sponsors all are making an incredible commitment. And so, we take that very seriously. Like I said, I'm fucking a little bit nervous, to be honest.
Yeah.
It has to go right. Like I said, it has to go right. And I know it will, but yeah, I mean, I just can't wait till once it's done, then we're gonna like there's gonna be a week where we just don't even want to think about it, and then we're gonna start up again for the next year's conference.
Yeah. Let me ask you maybe. Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead.
I was going to just jump in before my question gets completely blown past. So I think for me, one of the interesting things, Zach, is going back and looking through the agenda and all the sessions is the differences in the organizations, right? You've got the platforms like the Inductives and the Litmuses and the Avivas and the Siemens who have a variety of things they can offer. But then you also have hardware vendors, right? So I know Opto is there, Opto 22, they will be there. They will be talking about and deploying. We got some systems integrators. And so I think it'll be very interesting to see the differences between like the hardware vendors, like maybe an Opto or a Dell. And I know Dell is much beyond that, but like the hardware infrastructure vendors versus the Google Cloud vendors, and the cloud vendors versus the platform vendors versus the integrator vendors, if you will, to see what sort of solutions they have. I don't think it really hit me until, I don't know, 2 hours ago when I was thinking of it. I mean, I was thinking, wow, it's not just everyone is going to deploy a UNS or is going to deploy a SCADA or an MES or whatever their solution is to a UNS and be able to go pull tags and hit the broker, right, and go be able to show everything. So for me, it'll be interesting to see what the individual groups are doing and how they're going through the process of proving it.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up the edge providers that are going to be there, like the hardware, Phoenix Contact, and their PLC Next with an Opto 22 with their Groove technology. Their PLCs are incredible, right? Like these are really platforms, honestly. Like with that, you could run many technologies on Docker, Ignition. You could be running Ignition on your Groove Epic, like. So to have that, and these are companies also like Opto, they've been in business for decades, right? So they've been through the transformation. So it's really an honor to have them at the conference as well. And you kind of touched on it there, like you said, to see the differences of what the hardware producers and they're going to show versus what the software vendors are going to show, and the cloud providers and the system integrators, right? But I think the edge hardware companies, they're going to be highlighting collecting that data and show and not only publishing it to the unified namespace, but also what other technologies they can run at the edge, right? Because we're going to be seeing a big, I think in 2025 we're going to be seeing a big push of doing more edge computing.
Yeah, and I think
I would imagine. I was gonna say, let me ask two structural questions, at least as much for us, but also for the attendees. So there are places where groups are going to have to go and prove it, right? There are two stages, and there'll either be one or two groups going on at the same time at the stages. There's also a conference room in which the groups will have booths. Will they have their solution? And mostly it's super selfish. Will Vlad and I be able to go pepper them with questions at their booths? And is the goal for them to show us what the solution is at their booths in addition to the stages, or is it more of like a normal conference at the booths and we can go ask questions? But yes,
great question. Right. So to give you an idea, like I said, there's 35 sponsors. You can go to proveitconference.com and click on sponsors. You can see who they all are. All of them will have a booth. All of the sponsors will have a booth. They're different sizes depending on what sponsor level. But all of them will have their Prove It technology, their Prove It session to display at their booth to be able to have a conversation about it.
Okay.
Only the silver, gold, and title sponsors are going to be going up on stage. And that's so the bronze sponsors will only be demoing it at their booth. So to answer your question, yes, that's going to be the way that you're expected to engage with these sponsors, is by going up to their booth and talking to them and seeing what it is that they have to to demonstrate, and they're all going to be connected to the same technology, even the all the sponsors, even the broad sponsors.
Okay.
And then we have the podcast booth, which that's going to be awesome. So we're going to be booking a bunch of podcasts. I know you guys are going to be there for a couple of days. So, you know, I think it's going to be incredible, honestly, and the amount of insights that are going to come out of it is going to be hopefully very valuable.
Agreed. No, I think that'll be super interesting. Let me ask structurally. So there'll be these prove it sessions. Will those be recorded and either we as attendees or everyone will be able to see those at some point?
Yeah, that's a great question. So all of the on stage, so we're going to be doing like interviews at all of the booths with all of the vendors to kind of ask them, you know, hey, what is your technology? You know, kind of like at a traditional conference floor. So all of those like social media type videos we'll be publishing out on social media after. The on stage sessions, like the silver and the gold and the title sessions, those will be made recorded and be made available to attendees. I think eventually they might be made available to the general public. I know that initially, if they would be made available, it'd be behind like a paywall, because the people that paid for the conference, I mean, just AV alone, we're spending over like $100,000 just on AV alone.
Oh, easily,
I think it's closer to 200,000, you know, to have the 2 stages and, you know, that's why we couldn't. It's really the vendor, like all the vendors. This is what I look at it, is all the vendors together collectively. It's their conference, right? And we're just stewards of it, you know. And we're connecting the community. Like we're kind of, you know, the stewards of the community and the voice of the community, and we're just connecting them together. And hopefully, like I said, if we deliver a great conference, that we could be able to do it again next year.
Let me ask you maybe a follow-up to those questions, right? But looking at the attendee standpoint, right? So to me, a traditional conference is obviously I might schedule some meetings, but if I show up to a traditional booth, I to some extent show up cold, right? And see a solution. Oh, like what's that solution? Explain to me. And there's a, you know, a conveyor next to a PLC, and it's easy to understand, right? But I think when it comes to maybe integrating into a facility, even when I go and, you know, look at a plan that I've never seen before, it takes a little bit of understanding of the process and maybe how things function. What do you expect maybe the attendees maybe to do as a little bit of homework, right? To be better prepared to see a solution that, you know, a vendor has prepared, because ultimately, you know, you've sent us a couple of documents, there's the specification, but it also, I think it's a good opportunity, right? Because now you're learning about a facility maybe in a different vertical than what you're used to. So you need to spend at least a couple of minutes to understand what is going on and what you're looking at when it comes to some of these more complex challenges.
That's a good question. Yeah, I think you should go into it with having a basic understanding of digital transformation and unified namespace. You know, we have a free mini course, the IoT mini course, that you can go to at iot.university. If you take that mini course, it takes like 2 hours to go through. That would give you a good solid understanding. Other than that, like, you know, there's a bunch of different theories and strategies on how to get the most out of a conference. I tend to go very serendipitously, right? And, you know, you know, you might just be at lunch and spark up a conversation with your person sitting next to you, and that could lead to a business opportunity, right? And that's the whole point of a conference, is you're getting all these people together in the same room to share ideas, collaborate, build relationships. Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense.
No, I think that was good, mostly because Vlad always wants to give us homework. A little behind the scenes on manufacturing.
Oh, like how to, yeah, just, you know, like, you know,
spend...
maybe scroll through and see who the vendors actually are. Maybe if you're not aware of who they are, maybe click onto their website. You know, if you go to proveitconference.com and click on the sponsors, you could see who they all are. And then if you click on the sponsor name, it'll go to their website. So, or you can just Google it. But like, yeah, I would just maybe have an idea of who the sponsors are. So then, you know, and then know which sessions do you really not want to miss, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Vlad, we've got like 98% of our questions that we still haven't asked Zach, and we've got a great question from Frank Lamb in the chat. So do you want to ask Frank's question about an application, or do you want to ask another question to Zach before?
I can pull up Frank's question. So Frank has I guess a technical questions for some context. Frank is doing work for a facility. As far as I know, this is the facility in Florida. And so he's asking, when you have a mature plant without the money to upgrade everything, and I think we've all been there, right? There's a whole lot of very old equipment that needs to be, I guess, is obsolete, needs to be changed. He says, but have a plant-wide ignition installation. Where would you start to ensure that everything doesn't get fragmented? Which is, I think, a very common pitfall you can get into. So curious, to that architecture discussion earlier, maybe if you have some thoughts on how you would approach a situation like Frank is describing.
Oh, that's a great question. So here's the answer. If you just have ignition by itself, you don't have a unified namespace. You have the ability to collect, it has a bunch of different drivers. You could, connect to PLCs, you could connect to OPC servers, collect data and build applications and solve problems. You can also model data, right? You could bring data in and then take that input data and create new data from that input data, right? Like modeling it or creating calculations on that data, on that raw data. But then how would you make that's available within the ignition namespace, but then how would you make that available to other namespaces or other consumers, right? Ignition tag by itself doesn't make it accessible to other consumers. I think there's maybe a way you could use a web dev call to get access to a particular tag value, but how could we make it available in a pub sub, a broker or client type of way? Well, you'd want to get the unified namespace set up, right? So, which means you'd need an MQTT broker, and you could do it two ways. You could have an external one, and then you could connect ignition to that external broker using the MQTT engine and the transmitter to publish tags, engine to subscribe to the engine allows you to subscribe to a broker and create ignition tags. So as you start publishing data to that MQTT broker, that external broker from other publishers, now it's automatically available in ignition. So now you have two ways of bringing data into ignition, not just directly natively into ignition and through OPC, but also through MQTT, through the unified namespace pub sub. So then it automatically becomes available within the ignition namespace. That's that's how you're getting the unified namespace. Or you could install like the distributor module, the Cirrus Link distributor module, which is an MQTT broker right inside of ignition. Which one would I do? I'd probably do the first one. And then, which broker do you want to choose? Download all three of them and play around with them and see which one you like best, or, no, I say all three, but pick three. Look at all of the available ones on the market, right? HiveMQ, EMQX, Mosquito, Sedalo, right? I know there's like a Hive broker or something, right? Was the new one that came out on Ignition as a free ignition module? There's oh no, that's not a broker, that's a transmitter. Never mind. But yeah, pick three brokers and then evaluate them based on your criteria, and then choose which one works best for you.
Absolutely. That was great. I think this is great. We will have to go find some time to sit down with Zach while we're at the conference to go discuss the other 98% of the things that we have.
Because it's I don't know if I really fully answered, but yeah. So Frank, once you have that broker in though, that's then where you've created the unified namespace, where then you could continue to build and scale on from there. And if you need to take that broker and swap it out for a new broker, you can, right? You don't. So it lives and grows with the business, because you're not going to solve all. I mean, you could solve all of your business problems within Ignition, but the second you want to start using other platforms, you need an easy way to get data in and out of those platforms, which is where unified namespace comes in. You also have your cloud connectors, right? Like, let's say you want to use a data provider like Snowflake. You want to get data into Snowflake. How would I get data into Snowflake? Well, if the only place that I'm publishing data to Snowflake is from Ignition, then I'd use like the Cirrus Link Snowflake connector injector module. If I'm publishing to Snowflake from Ignition plus other producers, like if I'm coming just from an MQTT broker, then I would look at another solution, maybe like HiveBytes, Snowflake injector. So, the answer is once you get the unified namespace in, that's how you prevent everything from getting fragmented and having a solid digital strategy in place.
Yeah, and I think maybe, again, without having all the context of what Frank is working on, maybe there's also a challenge of, he says that a lot of components are, I guess, on the mature side and they cannot upgrade everything. Maybe it's also simply that they cannot talk the protocols, whether that's OPC or even if it's MQTT, and there's a question of what do we upgrade first to even be able to get that data, right? And I think that's an entirely maybe separate challenge. How you prioritize your funds, and ultimately, are your guys at this point buying PLCs and IO cards on eBay because this has been discontinued for 20 plus years. So I think there's obviously a question on that side as well beyond the UNS architecture. Correct, Zach?
Correct. Yeah. Well, Frank says they seem to just build their ERP and MES into Ignition rather than implementing external applications. So Ignition's the only technology they have in their business? Or Ignition's the only software platform? They're not using cloud or like...
I think this might be a good opportunity to go take this entire 4-hour conversation offline, or at least off of this show.
Or an opportunity to
but no,
break out
it's
the
very
whiteboard.
interesting. It would, but we're already past our normal time, Vlad, and as everyone knows, I am sadly the keeper of the time. Otherwise, we would be talking until we all have to get on airplanes to go to Texas next week. Zach,
Excellent.
this has been awesome. Thank you so much. We will definitely find some time to catch up some more. Before we let you go, we want to ask you the same questions we ask all of our guests. And the first one, as you guys know, is one of my favorite of predicting the future. I guess I want to be a little bit more specific and kind of put you a little bit more on the spot than I had intended. Is Prove It the future of industrial conferences? Are we going to see more? Is it going to change everything? Or is everyone going to realize how much work you guys put in and it's going to be more of a blend?
I think we're already starting. All right, so there's two answers to that. As a concept and as a model, I think we're already starting to see that with conferences like Tulip, Operations Calling, right? I'm excited to see, Inductive and Automation, what they're doing with their conference this year. So I think we're already starting to see that as a trend, as a concept. But is Prove It the actual Industry 4 community conference, like the definitive one? I mean, we're just going to have to see. We're going to have to wait till February 18th to 20th to see. If you ask me, I'm going to say hell fucking yeah, because I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to do everything in my power, to make sure that conference is as good as possible. On one of the days, I'm going to be going up on stage to as an MC to bring Walker up on stage before he does his digital mastermind. So I'm pretty stoked. Just to see all of the community members there, and the students, and the people that actually make what I do for a living possible, right? That's I owe them a huge amount of thanks and gratitude for that, and hopefully, like I said, we can make it valuable. And like I said, I hope to continue to do it. If we started this year and it's this much of a success, and this is the only starting point, this is the ground zero, then I could see it getting better and better from here. So thank you. I look forward to meeting you guys there, dude.
Absolutely. Zach, we want to ask for some career advice. So typically it's early to mid-career. You've had a winding career already, right? From the technical to the marketing to the going through the process of now building or being integral to the part of building this conference. So if someone is coming to you looking for some career advice to get in the industry or maybe to make a move within the industry, what's the best piece of advice you have for them?
Yeah, I would definitely start working and start building, start playing with things, and then look at investing into education, developing yourself, developing your skills. For me, that wasn't college. There's a lot of online options, right? Like Vlad, you can learn how to build PLCs if you go to Vlad, and if you come to IoT University, you come to us, we can help you build out skills to become an Industry 4.0 professional, right? Have the software development skills, the database engineering skills, and the platform skills to build IoT applications, to build, to build these type of solutions. And so that's what we do, right? So if you're looking to do it at Industry 4.0, I would say come to IoT University, come to us and join our mentorship program, or look at our IoT Pro membership. That was another thing I was saying, like, are the recordings going to be available? If you're one of our pro members, you're going to get all of the access instantly. Like, as soon as it's available, you'll get all the access to all the recordings. But yeah, I would say invest in education, because that's what I did myself, right? I invested in education. I just went out and I did projects. I built solutions, even if that meant getting underpaid initially to just to get that experience. Take whatever you can, and then you can build on that from there.
And what I would say, and I make this comment quite frequently, I think now there's almost no excuse, right? If you go look at the sponsors for Prove It, most of them provide a platform for you to learn almost for free, right? If it's a software, there's trial versions. And again, not to tout ignition and inductive automation again, but ultimately, I feel like they've set the bar when it comes to just being able to download whatever you need, have a full, set of tutorials in video format, in written format. And the same could be said about Flow, right? So Flow has an entire university platform. They've released their historian not long ago that is completely free. So I think it's almost no excuse, right? The hardware that's sitting behind me costed me a lot of money, and there's something to be said about those licenses. But a lot
I'm glad you brought up Inductive University, because real quick, I was the first person to get credentialed with Inductive University when it first came out, before they actually announced it. I had early access and I went through all the modules. So why, and part of our mentorship program is we tell you to go get through Inductive University and get credentialed. That's one of the steps in our step training. Why is that? Because that's what I did when I was becoming an Industry 4.0 engineer, 12 years ago, right? So there's never a better time to start than now, like you said.
Absolutely. Dave?
Absolutely. No, I 100% agree with that. Just a quick shout out to last episode. We were talking all about Inductive University. So if you guys want to check out more of that, check out episode 194. We're focused very much kind of on the inductive and the ignition training, in part because they do such a great job and have been the gold standard for a decade or more at this point. Zach, if people want to know what you're reading, what you're watching, do you have a book and or content recommendation for us?
Okay. Yeah. Right now I'm going through Zach Wilson's data engineering bootcamp. He actually published a free one on YouTube, and it's available for the next couple of days. But yeah, Zach Wilson, he's a data engineer. If you just Google, he used to work for Airbnb and Netflix and Facebook, and he's built data pipelines that were handling 2,000 terabytes a day, 2 petabytes of data per day. So just going through that data engineering bootcamp and understanding how can these problems that Meta and Netflix and Airbnb were handling, how can I apply this to manufacturing, right? These are problems that when you get to the scale of Amazon or Tesla, or Walmart, they're running into scalability issues like that, right? Maybe a small manufacturer, if you have a bad architecture or you have poor database design, doesn't really matter because you're only one plant, right? But when you get to enterprise scale, that's where these things become really important. So my recommendation would be Zach Wilson's data engineering bootcamp.
I would say, if I could make that comment on that side,
Awesome.
I think very few engineers understand the problems that come as a result of working with that type of data. And I think you can certainly learn a lot on how to structure even, smaller, whether that's facilities, but ultimately any software from that type of experience. Where can we find it? Is it data?
Zach Wilson, ZACH.
Is it dataexpert.io? Is that his
Yes.
platform?
Yeah, that's his platform. Yeah. Yeah, I met Zach last year, and he's a really cool guy, and he's ADHD. He's like me. Every 2 years he needs to do something new, and so yeah, he quit Airbnb, and he did some really interesting data modeling things there that he talks about in his bootcamp and his content. But yeah, that what is the ultimate Industry 4.0 professional? It's you have OT and IT, not just knowledge, but ideally experience. You're really going to have a majority of your experience in OT or IT. Like you're either going to grow up in IT and then learn OT, or you're going to grow up in OT. Like Vlad, you and I, we grew up on PLC programming and OT technology, SCADA, and then we learned the IT stuff, right? I'm just learning Docker containers now, right? If I was in IT and I didn't know Docker, people would laugh at me, right? So
Yep. Yeah.
so, and then like networking, like I know a little bit of networking, and I know like server design, and like speccing and building out servers and virtual servers, and like I know a decent amount of IT, but like I'm no IT professional, right? I'm an Industry 4 professional. I'm fluent across the full stack, with the majority of my experience coming at the edge, and a decent amount in the MES layer, because I've built several MES systems, and I'm actually leading. I'm one of the cohorts, the training courses that I'm leading right now is an MES course where we're teaching how to build an MES platform inside of Ignition. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So it's an honor, like I said, to be able to work with the students and help guide them to gain knowledge and transform their careers. And
Excellent.
Absolutely. Zach, this has been awesome. Last question for you before we let you go is, how can our listeners help? Who should reach out just in general? And maybe if we want to go give the pitch for Prove It one last time.
Yeah, how can we help? I mean,
how can the listeners help you? What
evangelize the Unified Namespace. If you don't know what it is, really take a second to take a step back and understand, do a little research and understand what it is. If you haven't, you could take the free mini course at IoT University, and use that to help manufacturers, right? We've got a lot of political climates, and the waters are very tense right now. And what is going to be the solution? It's actually being productive and building things, building productive manufacturing facilities. And how do we do that? By leveraging Industry 4 technology. And our way of helping move the needle on that is by training, is by building the talent, by helping elevate the digital fluency of the community. If you want to join the community, one of the best places to do that is joining the Discord, the Industry 4.0 community Discord, which there's a link to that on our website at iiot.university. So, or just reach out, shoot me a message on LinkedIn, Zach Scriven.
We'll have all of those URLs
absolutely
on the description. Side note.
Absolutely.
Oh, and then the last call to action
for
Prove It. I mean, get your tickets quick. I'm not, because they're gonna be gone. You won't be able to get a ticket if you don't book it quickly. So, yeah, like I said, in the last 24 hours, we had like over a dozen tickets sold. We're already past our 500 goal. So at this rate, it'll sell out before the conference comes. So get your ticket if you want to come. I think it's going to be worth the investment. So.
Awesome. Zach, this has been awesome. Everyone, thank you so much for hanging out. If this sort of conversation excited you, stay tuned. Next week, Vlad and I are going to wrap up our training and upskilling theme. We're also going to talk about some of our thoughts about Prove It, maybe get a bit into the architecture, some of our hopes and wishes that we're going to see at the conference. And then we will be at the conference the following week. You guys will hopefully see us live. It's at least some amount of that, internet willing. But no, if you guys have made it this far, make sure you're following Zach and myself and Vlad. Make sure you're following Manufacturing Hub Network on LinkedIn. If you guys are watching on YouTube, you're absolutely amazing. We've also got a bunch of X followers for Vlad. So Vlad must have been live and tweeting at some point in the past. So make sure to follow Vlad along that. There will be some semi-frequent updates from him during these conferences. If you guys have made it in podcast format this far, thank you guys so much. We will probably be done with Prove It by the time you're listening to this in person, but go check the feeds. They will absolutely be full of all of the live in-person things. Zach, when I remember to ask people to subscribe and like and do all those things on the podcast format, and Vlad pushes the episodes live on Thursday mornings, more people listen, which is just